welcome to another off-the-shelf board game review. This week we're going to look at Seasons. Seasons is a dice rolling and card drafting game for 2 to 4 players, ages 14 up. Approximate playtime is going to be anywhere from 45 minutes to about an hour and a half, depending on how many players are playing. In Seasons, each player represents a wizard, trying to get the most prestige points to win the game. To get prestige points, players need to get crystals and summon power cards in a contest that will be tracked over 3 years of time. To bring the power cards out, players are going to have to roll dice with different symbols on them representing the different seasons that you can roll the dice throughout to get resources. All this together to create an interesting strategy game that combines dice mechanics, resource management, card play, and an interesting, very creative theme to form a really enjoyable game. The Seasons retails for about $50, and for that $50 you're getting a decent amount of components that are really high quality. Starting with the rulebook for the game, the rulebook for Seasons is very well written. It's an excellent rulebook, has a lot of gameplay examples, a lot of images throughout it. It breaks down how all the cards are used throughout the game with examples, samples of how they are explaining exactly what the card means, the abbreviated text on all the cards. It explains it very, very well. It breaks down the components very well. It does a fantastic job of teaching you how to play the game. After reading the rulebook, you're not going to have any problems figuring out how to play Seasons. Not that it's really a challenging game to learn how to play if you're familiar with resource management games and dice rolling mechanics. It's really not a tough game to learn, and the rulebook does a fairly good job of teaching you how to play the game. The rulebook also does have basic rules, intermediate rules, and advanced rules, and basically the differences between the basic and the advanced rules are the difficulty of the cards you're using to play and whether you're going to use the card drafting mechanics or not. And they recommend for the first couple times you play the game, you actually use the pre-sorted decks. Once you've learned the basics of the game, you can move on to the card drafting using the basic first 30 cards, and the cards are all numbered. Once you're very familiar with the game and you have a group of players who understand the concepts of the game and the card drafting mechanics, you can go ahead and start using all 50 cards for the game. Now, speaking of the cards that come with Season are very good quality. They are used of a very good card stock. These are not flimsy card stock at all. I have not sleeved these cards. I have not found a reason to sleeve them because they are very decent. They're very thick, very snappy cards, very durable cards. They have a lot of artwork on them. The artwork is a kind of a whimsical cartoony, but it's a very well done, very enjoyable artwork. Nothing too dark, but you'll notice that someone has a kind of, I don't want to say cartoony because that's the wrong way to describe it, because it's definitely not cartoony, but it's definitely a very whimsical art style, and I really enjoyed the artwork. Very fantastic, very thematic to look at. The text on the cards is extremely legible, no extreme typos, no odd language used. Very simplistic to understand the cards, especially when you understand how to use the game or understand how to play the game. Uses very basic symbols, and I'll explain what all the symbols mean, but it's very easy to understand the game. Uses color coding to help break down the cards. Very fantastically well-designed cards for the game. Next, we have the card stock used for all the cardboard components of the game. This is very thick card stock. None of this is flimsy cardboard or stuff that's going to fall apart on you. It's very nice, very pleasing to the eyes, very enjoyable artwork to look at all of them. Even the player boards are very nice. They each have their own individual artwork representing the different wizards. You have a little rabbit guy. He looks kind of scared. He looks kind of funny. Then you have the devious-looking cat, the strange little looking alien guy, and the little pumpkin head who's kind of cool. But again, you see the whimsical art style that comes with the game. All the cardboard card stock used for the game is very good, very thick, very high quality. It's going to last you a long time. You're not going to have to worry about flimsy components here at all. The game also comes with a couple of wooden cubes to help keep track of the scores and also measure the passing of time. They're wooden cubes, they're not plastic. They're pretty much your standard wooden cubes, but good quality. I like the wooden cubes. I prefer them over plastic components or even the small cardboard tracking components that comes with some games. Definitely a nice little touch. And finally, you have the dice that come with this game. Now, You may have heard that these are large dice, and when you've heard that these dice are large, it is not an understatement. These are some extremely large, fantastically designed, high quality dice. Now, to give you a size comparison on these dice, these are the dice from Seasons, and these are the dice from King of Tokyo. Now, King of Tokyo is considered to be a game that actually has some pretty decent quality dice that comes with it. And you'll see that the Seasons dice are larger than the King of Tokyo dice. And as a matter of fact, these Seasons dice dwarf the dice that come with quarters. I mean, these are the kind of dice that kick sand in the face of the quarters dice. These are high quality dice, very large dice. They are fully engraved, very large symbols, large numbers, very easy to read. The dice are so large you can easily read them from across the table. Really high quality components on the dice. Fantastic job there. Overall, when you look at the component quality for Seasons, you're getting a fantastic value for your dollar. Yes, the game costs $50, but you can get it online for cheaper prices. But even if you pay the full $50 retail for this game, the art style, the quality of the artwork, the quality of the card stock from the cards to the cardboard components is fantastic. The dice are extremely nice. You're getting 20 dice that are very large that probably cost, if you just bought them as a dice game, they're probably about $20 worth of dice right there. So really good components, high quality components, definitely worth every penny you're paying, especially when you realize, not to jump ahead of things, that this is a really fun, really enjoyable, great game. The Seasons is one of those games that's very easy to teach but very hard to master. It's going to take many plays before you even come close to grasping the finer details and the finer strategies for this game. The basic overview of Seasons is the game is going to be played over 3 years, which is going to be tracked with one of these cubes. Year 1, Year 2, and Year 3. You notice that this round circle is broken down into 12 numbers representing different months. You have winter in the blue, spring in the green, summer in the yellow, and finally fall in the red, which is going to be tracked by an additional black cube. As the time goes by, you're going to simply advance the cube, which is going to judge and help bring about the end of the game. The way players win the game is by gaining prestige points. Now, there are a couple different ways to get prestige points. One of the main ways that players are going to get prestige points are tracking through the crystal board. Now, at the end of the game, however many crystals you have is going to be equal to how many prestige points you have. So if you have 150 crystals, you're going to end up with 150 prestige points at the end of the game. And it's simply tracked with a number all the way from 1 to 99. And if you manage to get to 100 or to 200, you simply tack that on extra. So if you happen to be the purple wizard, you'd simply have a purple cube to track your crystals and an additional purple cube to help track when you break 100 and 200, which is an add-on additional crystals. You're also going to get additional prestige points for managing to get power cards into play. Now, every single power card in the game is going to have a number in the upper left-hand corner. That number is how many prestige points this card is going to be worth at the end of the game. The trick is, if you have these cards in your hand at the end of the game and you don't manage to get them into play, they're going to be worth negative points. Every card you don't get into play, no matter how many prestige points it's worth, is worth -5 points. So the 6, 20, or 100 is the number here. It doesn't matter. If it's still in your hand, it's going to be worth -5 points. But if you do get it into play, it's going to give you that many prestige points at the end of the game. Now, at the end of the game, there are 2 ways to lose prestige points, and that'll be taken away from your final score. The first way I've already explained to you. You're going to lose 5 prestige points for every card that's still in your hand. You're also going to lose prestige points every time you use one of your special abilities. So you want to use these special abilities as little as possible, but sometimes they'll help you get out of a tight jam. Now, you're going to see a little track on your wizard board, and it's going to show 0 if you use 0 special abilities, -5 prestige points at the end of the game if you use one of your special abilities, -12 if you use 2, and finally -20 prestige points at the end of the game if you use 3 of your special abilities. And I'll explain those special abilities when we get there, but I don't want to jump ahead here. But you're going to simply track your special ability use by one of these cubes. Every time you use one of your special abilities, you simply advance the cube until you hit -20 and you can't use your special abilities anymore. Now I'm going to go ahead and explain your sorcerer board to you. Your sorcerer board is pretty simple to follow along with. There's 2 tracks on the sorcerer's board. One is pretty obvious. You're going to see it's numbered 0 to 15. You're also going to see there's a little track here, number 1 through 7, which are these little circular ridges on the wizard's board. And these circular ridges are going to track your elemental resources as you gain them from rolling the dice. As you gain these resources, you're simply going to stick them on your board. Doesn't matter what order you place them in, these are just basically resources you use to spend to bring cards into play. Now there's 7 bumps because you can only have 7 resources in play unless you play a card that allows you to go beyond that 7 card or that 7 resource maximum. Additionally, there's also going to be your summoning gauge, which are these numbers from 0 all the way up to 15, which is going to be tracked again with the cube. Now the summoning gauge tells you the maximum amount of cards that you can ever have in play at one time. So if your summoning gauge is at 0, you cannot play any cards into play. And remember, every card that's left in your hand at the end of the game is going to be worth -5 points. Since every player starts the game with 9 cards in their hand, if you never raise your summoning gauge, you're going to lose 45 points at the end of the game because 9 times 5 is 45. So as you raise your summoning gauge, it's going to allow you to put more and more cards into play until you reach 15, which is the maximum amount of cards you can have in play at any time. Now seasons, as the name suggests, is played across different seasons for the game. Now you have different colored dice that represent the different seasons of the game. And you're going to have as many dice in your game as there are players plus 1. So if you're playing a 2-player game of Seasons, you're going to have 3 dice. If you're playing a 3-player game of Seasons, you're going to have 4 dice. And if you're playing a 4-player game of Seasons, you're going to have all 5 dice. Now all these dice have different symbols on their different faces, even among the individual seasons. I'll take a quick moment to explain the different faces of the dice really quick. I'm going to go ahead and use the summer dice here, which are the yellow dice. Now there's different symbols on these dice. First we'll see that there's symbols that represent elements. Red, fire, little trees are earth. So if you were to roll this die and it would come up with this face right here, you'd gain 2 fire elements, where if you roll this dice with the 2 trees, you get 2 earth elements. If you ever see a number, you're going to gain that amount of crystals, which is going to be added to your board. So if you rolled this die, for example, you would gain 2 crystals permanently, so you'd advance 2 crystals, and you'd also gain 2 fire elements, which would be added to your player board. You're also going to notice a symbol, which is a star. If you ever roll a star and you decide to keep that die, you're going to be able to advance your summoning gauge by 1. You'll notice there's a star symbol here if you forget. Matches the star symbol, so if you ever get a star, your summoning gauge is permanently going to go up 1 point unless something causes your summoning gauge to go down. So for every time you roll a star, you're just going to simply advance your summoning gauge maximum. Every time you roll a star, it keeps going up. There's an additional symbol on the die called the transmute symbol, and I'll explain transmute towards the end because that's where it gets a little confusing. But the transmute symbol, you'll see there's a circle around the symbols with these little half circles around the end. Anytime you get a face with that symbol, that means you get an additional transmute action. You'll see some of the faces have the transmute side, some of them don't. There's also 2 more additional symbols you'll see on the die. One is a square, which means you get to draw a card if this is the die you pick. Or another one is going to be a number. Again, anytime you gain a number, if you keep that die, you're going to gain that many crystals. So if you roll a 6, you're going to simply advance your board. 6 crystals go to 2 to 8 in this example. And finally, on the bottom of every die, you're going to see a series of dots. And it'll be anywhere from 1 to 3 dots. This side has 2, for example. This side also has 2. This side has 3 dots. And this side right here only has 1 dot on it. What that dot signifies is how many months are going to pass on that player's turn, or on that at the end of that series of players' turns. So if this was the final die at the end of that round of play, the month would advance 1 on the month track. Whereas if this was the final die, it has 3 dots, you would simply advance the month track 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3. As the months advance, you're going to use the dice from that season. So if your season is currently in the spring months, you're going to use the spring dice. If you're in the summer months, you're going to roll the summer dice. If you're in the fall, you're going to roll the fall dice. And of course, if you're back in winter, you're going to roll the winter dice. Now that you understand a rough overview of how the components are used, I'm going to explain how the game is actually played. Now to start, Seasons uses a card drafting mechanic, and anybody who's ever played games like Seven Wonders is going to fully understand the card drafting mechanic. Basically, each player is going to be dealt 9 cards. Then each player is going to pick up all 9 of their cards. They're going to go through the 9 cards that they've been given, pick one of the cards to add permanently to their hand. They're going to take all the cards that are remaining, pass it to the next player, who's going to do the same thing. They're going to go through the cards, pick one of the cards that they want to add permanently to their hand, take the remaining cards, and pass it back to the next player in line. You're going to continue doing this until each player has 9 cards in their hand. Now that's using the basic rules. The introductory rules actually give each player a set of 9 predetermined cards, and these are more straightforward cards that are a little bit easier to understand, to learn to play the game with. And I definitely recommend the first couple times you play the game, you use the preset decks. Once you're familiar with the game, go ahead and use the card drafting rules. Once each player has their 9 starting cards, they're going to go through their cards and they're going to organize them into sets of 3. Basically, you're going to get 3 cards per year to play. Of course, you can get more cards from the draw pile, but you're only going to start off with 3 cards in the beginning. So you go through your cards, and this is where the strategy and understanding how to play the game is going to come into effect. It's going to take me a long time to explain the strategy to you, so I'm just basically showing you how to play the game. You're going to take 3 cards that are going to be your first year cards. You're going to take 3 more cards. Again, you get to pick which cards you want. They're going to be your year 2 cards, and then your remaining 3 cards are going to be your year 3 cards. Once you have done that, you're going to put a year 2 symbol on top of your year 2 cards, so you know you can't use those cards till the second year starts. And you're going to take a year 3 symbol and put on top of your year 3 cards to let you know you can't use those cards until the third year starts. Each player is going to do the same. Again, you get to look at your cards and strategically decide which cards are going to be your year 1, your year 2, and your year 3 cards. And that is part of the strategy, and you definitely want to know how to do that for an optimal strategy. Again, put the year 2 card token on your year 2 card so you don't use them, and your year 3 token on your year 3 cards so you definitely don't use them. Once each player has drafted their starting cards, they're going to simply put one of their cubes on the 0-point space on the crystal track, and their other cube on the 0 for the 100th place on the crystal track. You're going to put a cube down on your summoning gauge and on your special ability gauge. Then you're pretty much ready to start playing. I'm going to go ahead and move up the year 1 cards so you can see them pretty plainly so you understand what exactly is going on. Again, these cards are not shown to the other players. This is just, I'm showing you an open hand right now. But again, when you play, your cards are kept secret from your opponents so they do not see what cards you have in your hand. Each player will start with 3 cards in their hand. But again, nobody else gets to see them, and you can't touch your year 2 or your year 3 cards until the gauge advances from year 2 to year 3. And when you advance from year 1 to year 2, even if you still have cards in your hand, you're still going to draw your year 2 cards, and they're going to be added on to any cards you may still have in your hand. So if you, for some reason, manage to not put any of these cards from year 1 into play and year 2 starts, you're going to end up with 6 cards that you can play at that point. And when you move on to year 3, you're going to bring out your year 3 cards. And again, if for some strange reason you haven't played any cards, you're going to have a handful of 9 total cards at that point. I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to explain to you the 2 different kinds of power cards that come with the game. There are the familiar cards, and these are easy to recognize because they have an orange border. The power or the prestige points you're going to get at the end of the game if you get this into play is going to be orange, letting you know it's a familiar card. And then you're going to have magic item cards which have a purple background. So familiar is orange, magic items are purple. You're going to notice different symbols on the bottom left corner of the card. There's going to be a symbol that looks basically like a gear. You're going to notice a symbol that looks like a down arrow, and you're going to notice a symbol that looks like an arrow in a circle. Now any card that has a symbol that looks like an arrow in a circle means that's a permanent ability. As soon as you bring that card into play, it's permanently going to give you the special benefits of that card. A card with the arrow is basically going to be a one-time use card. Once it's brought into play, its effect is going to generate, and it's not going to give you any more effects for the rest of the game, but it is going to score you those prestige points at the end of the game. And finally, you have that gear symbol. Now that gear symbol is going to be familiar to people who played multitude of different card games. Basically, it's going to be the tap or the exhaust symbol, which means you can use that card's ability once per round, and you're going to turn the card 90 degrees sideways to show that you've used the card for that round and you're going to gain the special benefits of that card. At the beginning of every round, those cards are going to refresh, but again, you can only use them once per round. Now there's two different ways to get cards into play, and sometimes they'll overlap and blend. One of the ways is to spend energy on elemental energy to bring this card into play. For example, to bring this card in play, if you can discard a water, earth, air, and fire symbol, then you simply discard all those symbols and then you bring this card into play. Alternately, there are cards that actually cost you crystals to bring into play. Now remember, crystals are your victory points at the end of the game, so there's kind of a risk by bringing these cards into play. But for this example, this one costs 20 crystals to bring into play, but at the end of the game it's worth 30 prestige points for a net gain of 10 points, so it's a good card to bring into play, but you need to have at least 20 crystals to bring it back into play in the first place. Now, how do you gain those resources to bring those cards into play? At the start of every round, you're going to look at what month you're in and you're going to roll the dice that match that month. So at the very beginning of the game, in year number 1, month number 1, the youngest player is going to start. The rules do say youngest player starts, and the youngest player is going to grab the dice. They're going to roll all the dice, and then that player, that first player, gets to look at the 3 dice that are rolled, pick one of those dice, and that gets to be their dice for that round. And this is a bad example, so I'm going to roll again because I want to give you a little bit of variety so you see what's going on. Here's a better example. So we have a die with a star, which is a good starting die because it's going to allow you to raise your summoning gauge. And this one also has a transmute action. Again, I'm going to explain transmute in just a few moments, but it deals with this board here. And you're also going to have one that has some resources on it. So player 1 is going to start, and they're going to take this die, which has a star and 2 water symbols on it. And they're going to place it over here. Some people like to place it in the circle. You can place it in the circle, it doesn't really matter. When you get the expansion, this circle doesn't actually exist no more. It's for power, but for now it's okay right there. Once the first player has chosen their die, player number 2 gets to choose the die from the remaining 2 dice. And there is a little bit of strategy here because whichever die is not chosen is going to advance the calendar. So if player number 2 decides to pick this die right here to gain 3 crystals and 2 water, they'll simply place it over here, and then this is going to be the remaining die that's going to tell you how many months are going to pass at the end of this player's turn. Once the dice are chosen, player 1 is going to gain the resources they're going to gain from their die. We'll see that we have a star, so our summoning gauge is going to go up 1 point. And we're going to gain 2 resources. We're going to gain 2 water resources. So we place them over here, and we now have 2 resources of our maximum of 7. Now this player can use these resources to possibly bring out cards. Now you can bring out as many cards on your turn as you can pay the cost for. So for example, this one has a 0 cost you can bring into play, and if I had 2 of these feathers, I can bring this card into play. If I also had 2 fire, I could bring all 3 of these cards into play on 1 round. Unfortunately, all I have are 2 water resources, and I can't bring any of the other cards into play except for this one. This is a bad card to bring out first round because it's not going to do anything for me right now. So this player will announce the end of their turn. The next player will now take their turn. They're going to gain the resources of the die, so we're going to gain 3 crystals for the orange player. And they're also going to gain 2 water resources. That shows we have 2 of our maximum 7 resources. We didn't gain a star, so our summoning gauge didn't go up. So even if we had the right resources, for example, if we got 1 water and 1 fire, normally we could pay the resources to bring this card into play because it costs a water and a fire, but our summoning gauge is still at 0, so we can't bring any cards into play. So that's why those stars are really nice. But you're not trapped because each wizard has a special ability. You'll notice that on each wizard card there's a series of 4 symbols right here. This symbol right here allows you to transmute any 2 elements into different elements of your choice. So if you had 2 water elements and you wanted to turn them in, you can turn them into 2 fire, 2 earth, an earth and a fire, 2 earth, or whatever you want to do. This one is going to allow you to transmute for +1 to your transmutation. This symbol is a star, which happens to match your star over here. So if you use this special ability, your summoning gauge will go up. So if you spend this ability, your summoning gauge will go from 0 to 1, or if you're at 7 currently, you spend it, you're going to go up to 8. And finally, this special ability right here is going to allow you to get extra cards. Here's the trick though, every time you use one of these special abilities, you're going to start getting the negative prestige points. So the first time you use any one of these special abilities, you're going to lose 5 prestige points at the end of the game. The second time you use any of these special abilities, you're going to lose 12. And the third time, you're going to lose minus 20. Now you can use any of these abilities. They're not locked out once they've been used, so you can use the +1 star ability to gain extra 3 to your summoning gauge all 3 times, but that's going to be worth minus 20 points into the game, so you want to make sure you balance the use of those special abilities. So if this player on their turn 1 and 2, they can sacrifice minus 5 prestige points into the game to use their ability to gain extra summoning gauge, go up 1 on their summoning gauge, discard the water and the fire element, and bring this card into play. Once that's done and all the players have played all the cards they're able to play or want to play, you'll simply look at the last remaining die, count how many dots are on that die, and you're going to advance the season gauge that many spaces or that many months. We have 3 dots, we're going to advance 3, and winter is now going to be over and we're going to begin spring. The previous dice are going to return to the wheel, and since we're now in the spring, player number 1 is going to grab the spring dice, roll those dice, and we're going to start the process all over again by player number 1 picking which die they want, player number 2 picking which die he wants, and then the final die is going to go to the center of the wheel. And the game is going to go on like that, advancing the wheel, advancing the years. At the end of the 3rd year, after you advance out of fall, you're going to total up all the scores. Whoever has the most prestige points at the end of the game is going to be declared the winner. Now before I show you a sample game, and I'm going to go through an entire year just to show you how the game plays out, I want to make sure I explain transmutation to you. Transmutation is an additional way to get victory points and crystals at the end of the game, but it's probably the most complex idea to get across when explaining the game. If you look at the seasons wheel, you're going to see a symbol that matches the crystal symbol, which is how you score your victory points and your prestige points at the end of the game. You're also going to see elements on the board. For example, you'll see that air and fire in the middle of the fall will give you 1 crystal if you transmute it. You'll see that earth, since it's between the 2s, is worth 2 crystals if you transmute an earth token. And finally, if you transmute a water token during the fall, it's going to be worth 3 crystals. Now if you change the seasons and go all the way over to the spring, you'll see that during the spring, earth and water is worth 1 crystal. You'll see 1 crystal on each side of the wheel. Air is worth 2 crystals. And finally, fire is worth 3 crystals. Whereas in the winter time, earth is worth 3, fire is worth 2, water and air are worth 1. Now, to transmute, all you need to do is have the resources available, and if it's whatever season it's in, if you roll the transmute symbol, which is, remember, is the circle with the half circles around the edge of it, if you roll that, you simply figure out what season you're in, and if where you are in the spring, for example, we can turn in all 3 of our earth resources, our earth element, and we'd gain 3 crystals, which would be a pretty terrible transmutation rate. But if we had water and fire, for example, we can turn in all 3 of these resources, and we'd see that water is worth 1, not a great trade-in rate, so that'd be 1 crystal, plus 1 more is 1 more crystal, but fire is worth 3, so if we trade in all 3 of those, we gain 5. Of course, the more strategic decision would be to keep the water, transmute the fire only to gain 3 crystals, and then keep the water because that's a better transmutation rate. So transmutation is a good way to gain extra crystals. You just got to be careful because you already given up your resources that allow you to bring the cards into play when you transmute, and you can only transmute if you decide to activate the special power, and when you do, you're going to gain an extra 1 crystal by activating the power, or if you happen to roll the die, you're also going to get the ability to transmute. Those are the only times you can transmute. You can't do it anytime you want. Now that I've explained to you how to play seasons, we're going to go ahead and do a sample game. It's It's going to be a quick 2-player game. Seasons is very quick when it's played with 2 players. It does get long with 4, so I did want to make sure I only showed you a 2-player game. I'm going to start off with the purple player. They're going to be the first player. So I'm going to start off by rolling the dice. I've already done the card drafting. They already have their hands. I want to get past that because it does take a few minutes to do that. So each player does have their hand of 3 starting cards, and we're now ready to begin. Purple starts by rolling the dice, and I guess that was pretty poor planning me right there. Let me move these boards really quick. And we'll start with our dice. Purple is going to go ahead and start with the blue die right here. That's going to give them a +1 to their summoning gauge and the fire element. And the orange player is going to take the other one. And this is going to leave this die right here, which is going to go to advance the season's gauge. We're going to start with the purple player. He's going to gain 1 to his summoning gauge. He can now bring 1 card out. And he's also going to gain a fire element to add to his total for his resources. It's now the orange player's turn because purple doesn't have any cards he can put into play. Orange is going to advance his summoning gauge by 1. Because he has a star, he's also going to gain an air element, which is represented by the feather. And unfortunately, the orange player doesn't have any cards that he can put into play yet either. So that's going to be the end of the player's turns. We're now going to advance the season's gauge, which is going to go up 2 months from the first month. We're still going to be in the middle of winter, and that's going to be the end of the first round of the game. Player 1 is going to grab all the dice again, simply roll them, and we're going to look at the results of what we've gotten. The purple player is going to take the die that advances his summoning gauge and also gives him the fire element, and the orange player is going to do the same, leaving this 1 die remaining, which is going to advance the season's gauge. Go back to the purple player. He's going to gain +1 to his summoning gauge, which brings him up to 2 now. And he's going to also gain a fire element. The purple player does have a card he can play now. He's going to go ahead and play a card called Amulet of Fire. An Amulet of Fire costs 2 fire resources, and as soon as it's played, it's a 1-use card. You know that because there's a down arrow there. Once it's played, the only thing it's going to be good for is prestige points at the end of the game. But once you spend the resources and put this card into play, it's going to allow you to draw 4 cards from the draw deck, pick one of them, then discard the rest of the cards. So we go ahead and put this card into play. We're going to spend the 2 fire resources to do it. And then we're going to go ahead and draw 4 cards. Now as a purple player, we get to look at all 4 of these cards, and we get to decide which one of these 4 cards is going to be most advantageous to us. We're going to add that card to our hand, and the other 3 are going to be discarded. And again, you don't show these cards to other players so they don't know what card you're picking. Purple player will go ahead and take a card called the Hourglass of Time. Hourglass of Time is a fantastic early game card because every time the seasons change, you're going to gain 1 energy token. Now that's a great thing in the early game, but towards the end of the game where there's not that many seasons left, it's not going to help you. So we definitely want to get this card out as soon as possible because that's basically 1 free energy token 4 times a year if we get this out early enough. That's not the end of the purple player's turn though. He still has 1 more card he's going to play. He's going to go ahead and play Temporal Boot. It's a 0-cost card, but it does give you 8 prestige points at the end of the game. And what it allows you to do is allows you to run the seasons track backwards. So we'll go ahead and put this over here. And again, these cards that all have the down arrow, you can basically put them in one pile because unless a card forces you to discard, they're not worth anything except prestige points at the end of the game. So you can basically put them off to the side so you don't get confused with your reusable cards and then continue on with the game. These boots are going to allow us to run the seasons gauge back, and we're going to go ahead and advance it back 2 spaces. Maybe a little bit early to use this card, but I do definitely want to show you how these cards interact, and I'm going to go ahead and use it now. Probably not the best strategy, but you see how the card is used now. That's the end of the purple player's turn. It's now going to be the orange player's turn. His summoning gauge will go up 1 because he has a star. He now has 2. He can have 2 cards in play. Now remember, purple had a summoning gauge of 2. That's what allowed him to get the second card out. If his summoning gauge hadn't gone up, he wouldn't have been able to play that second card. So it was good that we got our summoning gauge up at that point. Back to the orange player. Their summoning gauge is now at 2. They're going to gain 1 fire element. The orange player doesn't have any cards that he can put into play yet. He's got a little bit of strategy he's trying. Not going to put any cards into play yet. That's going to end the orange player's turn. We're going to look at the seasons die. We're going to see that we're going to advance 1 month. We simply advance from month 1 to month 2 of winter. We re-grab all the dice, and that's going to be the end of that round of the game. We'll be back to the purple player. He's going to roll the dice for the season. And then it's going to be up to the purple player to decide which die they want to grab first. The purple player is going to go ahead and take the die that allows them to transmute, gain a summoning gauge, and also going to gain an air energy token. And the orange player is going to grab the die that allows them to gain 2 water and 3 crystals, which is going to leave this die remaining to advance the season's gauge. We'll start the round with the purple player. Again, the star allows them to raise their summoning gauge. They're now up to 3. So if they had a card to play, they could actually put a card in play, but they don't have one to play yet. But they do need to make sure they gain their energy token for their element of air. At this point, they could do a transmute because they did get the transmute symbol. Unfortunately, the only energy crystal they have to transmute is the air energy transmute. And you'll see that air is only worth 1 crystal, which isn't really worthwhile at this point. So we're going to go ahead and ignore the transmute for now. And the purple player's turn. We're going to go ahead and do the orange player's turn. The orange player is going to start their turn by gaining 3 crystals, which will put them from 0 all the way up to 3. They're also going to gain 2 water tokens, 2 water element energy tokens. And this is going to allow them to get some cards into play. Now right now the limit of the amount of cards they can put into play right now is 2 unless they use their special ability, but we're not going to do that yet. The orange player is going to start playing their cards now, and sometimes it does matter what order you play your cards in, but right now for the cards we're going to be playing, it doesn't matter what order we're going to play them in. So we're going to start with our first one, which is called the Balance of Ishtar. This is actually going to cost us 2 crystals to bring into play. Now remember, every time we lose crystals, we're going to lose prestige points at the end of the game, so we need to make sure that risk is worth it. This early in the game is definitely worth it though, so we're going to spend the 2 crystals, which will bring us back down to 1 crystal to get the Balance of Ishtar into play for us. Now the Balance of Ishtar is a really good card. It's a card that every time we use it, what it allows us to do is discard 3 energy crystals or energy element tokens to gain 9 crystals on the crystal tree. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to bring the Wondrous Chest into play. It costs a water and a fire energy token to bring into play. And what that's going to allow us to do is if we ever have 4 or more energy tokens in play at the end of the turn, we're going to gain 3 crystals. Cost a water and a fire, so we're going to simply discard a water and a fire. We now have 2 cards in play. That's the maximum amount we can have in play until we increase our summoning gauge, and that's going to end the orange player's turn. We're going to go and advance the months, 3 dots for 3 months. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. We're now into spring. We're done with the winter dice for this year, unless the track moves backwards. We're going to start with the purple player's turn again, who's going to start with the spring dice, the green dice. Back to the start of the new season, it's going to be the purple player's turn. We're going to start by rolling the green spring dice. And then we need to decide which kind of dice we're going to keep for the first player. Now this is where a little bit of strategy starts coming in, especially when you're choosing dice. All these dice are going to give the earth element, so whichever dice we pick is not going to make a big difference. But right now we can mess with the orange player and kind of hamper their ability to grow their wizard at this point. I only see 1 die with a star on it, and we already know the orange player only has the ability to bring out 2 cards unless they use their special ability to gain an extra summoning gauge. So if I take this die away from them, preventing them from taking it, they can't easily raise their summoning gauge. So we're going to go ahead and do that to mess with the orange player a little bit, and then the orange player is going to take the die with the 3 crystals, leaving this die to advance the season's gauge. Purple player is going to gain 1 advancement on the summoning gauge, bringing them up to 4. They're going to gain 2 earth energy tokens. And since we want to really get out that hourglass of time, that's all we're going to do on this turn. Orange player gets to start their turn. They're going to gain 3 crystals, which is going to bring them from 1 all the way up to 4 crystals. They're also going to gain 2 of the earth energy tokens. And since it's still pretty early in the game, they're not going to waste their special abilities to gain extra stars or anything along those lines. They're going to go ahead and end their turn, and we're going to go ahead and advance the season's gauge by 2 months. And this will move us into the summer months. Purple player is going to start, and he's going to roll the dice for the season. and then he needs to figure out which dice he's going to take. The purple player is going to go ahead and take this die with the fire symbols on it and the +1 to the summoning gauge. Now orange player needs to raise their summoning gauge. They're not willing to blow their special abilities yet, so they're going to take the other die, which is just going to give them a water symbol. But that's actually going to be pretty good for them, and that's going to leave this die right here remaining to advance the season's gauge. And I just noticed I made a slight error from the prior round, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that really quick, and I apologize for making that mistake. I'm usually very good about this. But we did have our card in play, the Wondrous Chest, that said at the end of the round if we have 4 energy tokens in play or more, we're going to gain 3 crystals. I'm going to go ahead and take those really quick. I apologize for the error. That is going to put the orange player at 7. And that'll be an after effect from the prior round. I'm just fixing that really quick. Again, my apologies there. We'll go ahead and start the purple player's turn. They're going to gain 1 to their summoning gauge, which is going to bring them up to 5 on their summoning gauge. They're also going to gain 2 fire tokens, 2 fire energy tokens. And on top of that, they're going to go ahead and use one of their special abilities. They're going to cash it in, and they're going to use the transmute ability. They're going to turn this token right here into a feather token. And they're also going to turn this token right here also into a feather token. And actually I mean a water token. A little bit more challenging to play a game upside down. You can't see it quite as well when I'm trying to explain the game, but we're going to turn it into a water token. We're then going to bring a card into play. We're going to go ahead and bring in the Hourglass of Time into play. It's going to cost 1 of every resource, so we got our air, earth, water, and fire resources, which are going to be turned in to bring out the Hourglass of Time. Now the Hourglass of Time, again, is a great card to bring out early in the game. Every time the season changes, we get to gain any 1 energy token we want of our choice, which is a fantastic ability. And we can easily bring out the card because we only have 3 cards in play and we're allowed to have 5 total. It's going to leave us 1 resource left over, and we're going to go ahead and end our turn and move on to the orange player. The orange player at the start of their turn, they're going to go ahead and gain 1 to their summoning gauge, bringing them up to 3. And they're also going to gain a water energy token. Now the orange player is going to do pretty much what the purple player did. They're going to go ahead and use their special ability to transmute to gain different energy tokens. They're going to go ahead and discard 1 of their feathers and 1 of their earth tokens. And they're going to transmute them into 2 fire energy tokens. And then we're going to go ahead and spend those 2 fire energy tokens to bring a card into play. We're going to bring in the Amulet of Fire into play, and this is a one-time use card, so we'll put it off to the side. And just like the Amulet of Fire used by the other players, can allow us to draw 4 cards, pick 1 to add to our hand, and discard the other 3. We're going to go through the 4 cards, and we're going to pick a card. In this case, we're going to take the Hand of Fortune. Hand of Fortune is a fantastic card. Reduces the cost of all future cards. And again, since it has that circle on the bottom of it, that means it's a permanent ability permanently added to our powers as long as this card remains in play. Of course, we need to get it in play to use its abilities. It does go into our hand, not into play yet. That's going to end the orange player's turn. Again, he can't have more than 3 cards in play because the summoning gauge is at 3. We're going to go ahead and advance the season gauge by 3 months, which is going to put us all the way over into the fall. And since the purple player does have the Hourglass of Time in play, that's going to give him the ability to gain 1 energy token because the seasons did change. And the purple player is going to go ahead and take an air token because he has a card he wants to get into play. And unfortunately, the orange player only has 3 tokens in play, so he doesn't get the special ability of his Wondrous Chest. That's going to be the end of that round, and we're going to move on to the final season of the year. Purple player is going to roll the red dice for the final season of the year, and he gets to decide which dice he's going to take. And the purple player is going to go ahead and take the die. That's going to give him 2 fire tokens and an extra 1 to a summoning gauge. And the orange player needs to increase his summoning gauge, so he's going to take the die with the star on it, which is going to leave this die right here finally to advance the season's gauge. Starting with the purple player, he's going to advance his summoning gauge all the way up to 6. He's going to gain 2 fire tokens. And then he's going to spend 2 of his air tokens to bring a card into play. He's going to bring the Amulet of Air into play. And again, this is one of those one-time use cards. As soon as it's played, it pretty much goes off to the side. And what it does, it allows you to increase your summoning gauge by 2. So we're going to go from 6 all the way up to 8. Definitely on the fast track to making sure we get all our cards out, so we're not going to have any cards left in our hand at the end of the game. That's going to be the end of the purple player's turn. He has no more cards left to play, and he has 2 fire tokens left over. He's actually in really good standing right now for the pretty much almost the end of the first year. Going to move on to the orange player. He's going to advance his summoning gauge 1 up to 4 because he has a star. He's also going to gain an earth token. That's going to leave him with 2 earth and 2 water. Unfortunately, he didn't get a third of a kind to transmute to gain 9 crystals, but he is going to get the bonus at the end of his turn of 3 crystals, so that's not too bad. Doesn't have enough energy to get the Hand of Fortune into play, so he's going to go ahead and end his turn. We will go ahead and advance the gauge 2 months. We're going to get 1 more roll in the fall. And since it's the end of the turn and we have at least 4 energy tokens in play, we're going to gain the special ability of the Wondrous Chest. Orange is going to gain 3 crystals and go from 7 to 10. And that's going to be the end of that round. And now it looks like we're going to have the final round of the year. We're going to go ahead and roll the dice one final time and see what we get. Purple needs to get some crystals, so we're going to go ahead and take this die right here. And this is a tough decision right here. I think we're actually going to take this one for this player, get some good resources, and I'll get him set up pretty good for the beginning of the next year. And that's going to leave this one die right here to advance the seasons. Purple player is going to gain 2 crystals, finally getting him some crystals on the track, finally. Going to gain 2 air tokens. And he doesn't have any cards to put into play, so that's pretty much going to be the end of his turn. Of course, he could use his special abilities. No reason to at this time. We'll move on to the orange player. Summoning gauge will go up 1 point. We're now at 5. Going to gain 2 fire tokens, energy tokens right here. We're getting pretty close to our maximum of 7, so we definitely want to make sure we start using these. Unfortunately, we can't bring the Hand of Fortune into play at this time because we do need air. But we can use a special ability if we're willing to risk the points, and probably not a good strategy, but I'm going to go ahead and do it here just to show you what would happen. We'll advance the gauge right here. We're now going to lose 12 prestige points at the end of the game, but we're going to transmute 2 of our energy tokens into another element. And we'll go ahead and take these 2 water elements. Since we're going to get lots of water in the next season, we don't have to worry about it being an element that we're not going to have much of. And we'll go ahead and turn those into air elements. And then we're going to go ahead and bring the Hand of Fortune into play. Again, great early cards can make all our future cards cost less energy to bring into play. We can bring it into play because we can have 5 cards. This is only 4 for now. It's going to cost us 1 earth, 1 fire, and 1 air token, plus 3 energy crystals, which we can easily spare. We're going to go down from 10 to 7. And we're going to have the Hand of Fortune in play, helping us quite a bit. That's going to be the end of the orange player's turn. We're going to advance the season 1 month. That's going to end the first year. We're going to move into the second year. Each player is going to be able to bring out their second season cards, which is going to be added to their hand of cards if they had any left. Both of our players have managed to spend all their cards, so they're not going to have any cards left over from the prior year, and they're going to start with brand new hands, brand new year, and the game's going to continue on from here. The Seasons list has a game for ages 14 and up for 2 to 4 players, plays in approximately 60 minutes. We'll get into the play time in just a moment. I want to concentrate more on the ages on the game right now. As a father of 2 young, very board gamers, it's very important for me to look at board games and judge if they're games that would be good for a family style of environment. And as I said, Seasons list is ages 14 and up, and I think that is really too high on the age range. I think Seasons can be played by much younger players, and actually I know it can be played by younger players. Any child who can read and read well can easily play Seasons. The game is designed very simplistically, and I don't mean strategically simple. I mean learning how to play the game is extremely simple. You roll dice, you gain resources, you spend those resources to get cards. Those cards are going to be worth points at the end of the game. Really simple concepts to understand. The game is so simple to understand that my 5-year-old, who is doing okay on his reading, can actually play Seasons, and he's actually beaten me before. And yeah, he's pretty bright, but at the age of 5 doing the reading, if he is able to read, I think a child can actually play this game. Now honestly, I have to use the basic rules when I play with him. He will ask me what the cards mean because he's not understanding all the words. The game does use large words, especially for a 5-year-old's vocabulary, and that's understandable. But like I said, the game is mostly concentrating on symbols, so he can look at a feather, know that he needs a feather symbol to play that card, and he understands that concept. He knows that the points in the upper left hand corner are going to be worth points at the end of the game. It's really, really simplistic. And for the most part, most of the artwork is fairly family friendly. Now there are some images that may be questionable for a family, but the nice thing is this is a card game where you can simply pull those cards out of the game, go through the images that you're comfortable with and comfortable with your children seeing, and simply have those mean the cards that you have for the people to play the game with. Now some of the images that may be a little more questionable are the image of the little silly guy about to be sacrificed by the dagger. Probably not something you want your kids to see. And there's the card with the mermaids on it. Not too big a deal for me, but if you look, that they're kind of a little bit risque. The elemental card is a little bit dark. Not too bad, but a little bit dark. And the Demon of Argos is one of those cards that may be a little bit questionable for younger eyes to see. But overall, most of the artwork is simplistic or really, again, I don't want to use that cartoony term because it's definitely not cartoony, but it's definitely very family friendly and very whimsical. I mean, oversized eyes. This looks like something you want to give a big hug to because it looks so cute. And even some of the images, this guy looks like he's being electrocuted, and that's how my youngest son describes it as an electrocution card, which I think is funny. It looks like a bunny being cartoon electrocuted. It's an image that I don't mind him seeing because it's, again, it's overly cartoonish and overly whimsical. I do want to emphasize though that Seasons strategically is a very deep game. Once you start using the drafting rules, the advanced cards, and all those rules, this is going to be a game that's going to blow your mind with how deep and strategic it can get. And that's at that point where I definitely would not recommend it for kids. But if you want to play with the basic rules where you don't use the drafting, where you use the simpler cards and the simpler card combos, this is definitely very easily a good family game that any child ages 9 and up can very easily play. And again, if some of the images on the cards are images you find questionable, you can easily pull those cards out and use different cards for the draft and have no problems. I can safely and easily recommend Seasons for a family 9 and up to play as a family. It does play up to 4 players, which is a really good thing. It does get a little bit long with 4 players. Since this is one of those games where everybody's going to be taking their turn one at a time, each additional player is going to add to the play time of the game. 2 players can probably get away with about 45 minutes, but a 4-player game is going to go about an hour and a half, possibly up to 2 hours, especially when you start using those advanced rules and advanced cards. So you definitely want to consider that aspect. I will say, just to reiterate though, really good family game, very family friendly from the images to the simplicity of teaching the game, but definitely there's a lot of deep strategy to this game, making this game very enjoyable for the adults to also play and have a lot of fun playing. Seasons does play from 2 to 4 players, and this is one of those rare games that is better with less players. And it doesn't make it a bad game as a 4-player game. It's just that Seasons can feel very long for what it is with 4 players. As a 2-player game, this game is great. It takes about 45 minutes to play. It's a perfect time frame to have a lot of fun without letting the game feel like it's starting to drag on. You got to understand though that the more players you add, the more downtime you're going to have, because if it's not your turn, there really isn't much you can do in this game at all. You're basically just watching what the other players are doing and trying to plan your own future moves. But if you already know what you want to do because you see your resources and you know what the potential resources that are coming up are going to be, again, you're going to be kind of distracted and not really feel like you're doing anything to be part of the game. And that's going to be one of the negatives for Seasons. It does become a little bit long with 4 players. It's not bad, but I would definitely recommend Seasons as a 2 or 3 player game. If you are going to play 4 players only, you'll still probably enjoy the game, but you would definitely notice that the game does seem to play a little bit more on the long end. Seasons, great 2-player game, fantastic 3-player game, good 4-player game, but definitely better with less players. Now, before I give you my final opinion on Seasons, I need to give credit where credit is due. And there's two things I want to mention about the quality about this game, and that's going to be the storage for the game. First of all, this game comes with a fantastic storage system for it. It has a very nice molded insert. Keeps all the components for the game very nice and snug, very secure. They did a fantastic job on this insert. And I wouldn't want to do a review of this game without at least taking a moment to mention this nice insert. Especially in these days where we get games from a lot of the big companies where we get our insert is basically a piece of cardboard and all the components fly all over, and we need to go out there and buy plastic containers, we got to go out there and buy rubber bands, we got to buy all these little secondary things just to store our games. So anytime I see a game that comes with a really fantastic insert, I got to give props to that company, and this is definitely one game that has a fantastic insert. The cards all have their own places, and even if you take and shuffle the box around quite a bit, the components aren't going to fly all over the place. Everything is kept very nicely. Their insert is perfectly molded for all the components. You can see that the components are made to fit in the box in a very specific way, and everything is held in a very fantastic manner. Again, I just want to give props to the company for taking the time to design a fantastic insert for a fantastic game. It's just pretty much icing on the cake. And the other thing I wanted to give credit for, and I've already just talked about this when I was explaining the components for the game in the beginning of the review, but I want to take a moment to commend the company for taking the time to also put some fantastic components in this game. Whether it's the dice, which are extremely large, very high quality, very durable dice, or you're just talking about the cards, which are nice, thick cardstock and very durable, which also have some really nice artwork on them. I mean, some of this artwork is kind of comical, but it's still really well done artwork that looks really nice. And even though some of them may also be kind of a dark, I call it a dark humor to it, it's still very nice artwork. It looks awesome, and even when they have darker, more adult theme, I guess adult theme is not really the right term, but more mature is the word I'm looking for, more mature artwork. Even that artwork is done very well. Fantastic artwork. There's over 50, actually my math is failing me, there should be exactly 50 different pieces of artwork for this game, so you're going to get a lot of variety. It looks fantastic. They did a great job, and I just want to commend them for taking the time to put some fantastic artwork in this game. It just adds even more and makes the game even that much better. Now, all these great components wouldn't mean a thing if Seasons was a terrible game. And thankfully, I can easily say that Seasons is not a terrible game. It's quite the opposite. Seasons is a fantastic strategy game. This is one of those games that's very easy to teach but hard to master. It offers deep levels of strategy and just enough randomness to make the game feel not like a mathematical exercise, but still offer enough randomness that forces you to modify your strategies every time you play the game. This isn't one of those games where you can math out the perfect strategy and have the perfect strategy every time you play the game, because there is enough randomness in there, whether it's through the cards or the randomness of the dice, that's going to force you to think on your feet, but also understand the basics of the game and understand what cards are good to use at what time, what dice are good to use at what time, and what deeper strategies you need to constantly consider, and also consider what strategies your opponents are using. Now, speaking of your opponents, I also love how this game offers the ability for you to interact with your opponents. Now, there isn't a lot of direct player interaction. There is the ability to use cards that will actually hamper your opponents, but it's not as offensive as some other games out there. But there is enough offensiveness in this game that allows you to feel like you can impact what your opponents are doing. Now, there's a couple ways you can do that in this game. One, you can look at your opponent's strategies, figure out which dice they need to advance their strategies, and if you're smart enough to pick the right dice that your opponent needs and keep them out of their hands, you can control the flow of the game, and that's also going to make you a better player. And now that's the subtle interaction that you do with your opponents. On top of that, there's also quite a few great cards in this game that actually allow you to directly impact what your opponents are doing. For example, the card Cairn the Destroyer allows you to discard one of energy token, and each of your opponents must then lose 4 crystals. Now, this in itself isn't that powerful, but if you get this card out in the early stages of the game, or if you're able to get 2 of these cards out in the early stages of the game, you can really start messing with your opponents, especially in a 4-player game where you're going to start causing everybody to lose 8 crystals every round if you're willing to give up those energy tokens. That alone would be a good card. There are also cards such as Figrim the Avaricious, and what she does is allow you every change of season, you're going to start affecting your opponents every time that season changes. Again, subtle cards allow you to interact with your players and mess with their hands just enough that you're not feeling like you're totally screwing your opponents over, but enough to let you feel like you're affecting what their strategies are each turn. There's also cards such as Silas the Faithful, which causes you to make your opponents sacrifice power cards. Now this card in and of itself, not that powerful unless you combo it with cards such as the Runic Cube. If your opponent has this card out early in the game, if they're foolish enough to get this card out early in the game and they don't have a lot of other cards in play, or they have more important cards in play, if they have this card in play and then you followed up with this card, forcing them to discard that card, that's going to hurt them a lot. They have just lost 20 crystals, and it doesn't matter how good you are at this game, if you've lost 20 crystals, that's definitely hampered your strategy. There's also multiple cards that allow players to be forced to put cards back in their hand. Here's another one. This is another familiar. And again, remember, there's 2 copies of every card, so it is possible to get 2 of these cards in your hand and really start messing with your opponents. So overall, Seasons does offer some player interaction through the card play, efficient dice play and selection, and controlling the passage of time by choosing the proper dice on your turn and helping to advance or slow down the passage of the gameplay depending on where you're standing in the scores. And speaking of scoring, there's multiple ways of scoring this game, which is another aspect of the game I really do enjoy. You're not forced down one path. You kind of have to look at the overall picture and use the multiple ways to score to get the best score at the end of the game. Now, some methods of scoring are better than others, but if you ignore one method of scoring over another, you're definitely not going to get the best score at the end of the game. This is a game where you need to balance your strategies and look at all the multiple methods of scoring and make sure you're taking as much advantage of those to get the highest score at the end of the game. And those multiple passive scoring do add one more thing to this game that I really like. You never really feel like your turn is wasted because there's really nothing you can do on your turn. I have never had a gameplay where I felt like I have nothing to do on my turn. I always feel like there's at least something I can do to either advance my own strategy or hinder my opponent's strategy. And that's definitely a bonus in a good strategy game such as Seasons. Seasons definitely reward smart play, player experience, and good strategy. And that's going to slightly move into one of the negatives, but I don't want to get ahead of myself here. But I'll talk about player experience as a negative when I get there. I just want to finally say that the game does offer a lot of replay value with 50 different cards, and a drafting when you start using the intermediate and advanced rules is definitely going to really ramp up the replay value of this game. With 50 different cards duplicated, so basically you have 100 cards, and even in a 4-player game, each player is only starting with 36 cards. You have a lot of variety since you're using 36 out of those 100 cards every time you play. Plus the randomness of the dice is also going to increase the replay value. And finally, I like how the game uses smaller hands. You're going to draft 9 cards, and each year you're basically going to have 3 cards unless you roll a die to gain extra dice, or pardon me, if you roll a die to get extra cards, or if you play a card to get extra cards. So that's going to slightly reduce the AP of the game. Now, basic players, when they first start playing, when they're trying to figure out which 3 cards they're going to want for each year, that's going to slow down the game. But once you get the ball rolling, the game is not that slow playing because everybody has a hand of only 3 cards. Unless you get extra cards, you're basically going to have to figure out which 3 cards am I going to be playing per year. And once everybody's pretty much decent to average to good at this game, you're pretty much going to go through all your cards each year. It's rarely going to have you carrying cards over to a second year. So again, I like how the aspect really reduces the AP of the game, or the analysis paralysis. That can affect some players during strategy games. Now the game does have a couple negatives, and some of these negatives are pretty trivial, but they are things that may impact how much you really like Seasons. Now, when I was talking about the positives of the game, I was talking about how it rewards player experience. That can be a negative for Seasons also, because Seasons is one of those games where a player who's good at Seasons, who is playing people who are new at this game, a good player with lots of experience is going to absolutely trounce a new player. No questions asked. You can pretty much be halfway, not even trying, just barely even thinking about your strategies if you're a very experienced player, and you're going to still pretty much decimate a new player in this game. Now, I think that's a positive, but some people are bothered by games where they feel like they don't have a chance against another player. And to me, it's a sign of a good strategy game. To some people, they think that's a negative. I think it's a positive, but it's definitely something to mention that if you're a good player, you have a lot of experience with seasons, you have about 10 or 15 games under your belt. If you bring this game out with new players, please stick with the basic 30 cards. Stick with those basic rules, especially don't use the card draft. Let people get to experience this game the way you experience it. Learn it the right way, otherwise you're going to completely decimate new players. And they're probably not going to have like that great of an enjoyment of the game because they're going to feel like it's a game where they don't stand a chance, or they're going to feel like they're not understanding the basics of the game. Go easy on new players and everybody's going to have fun. And then once everybody knows how to play, then play to your hardest. Another thing to mention is that now this is going to be up to certain player groups. My player group loves this aspect, but I know there are groups who are not going to like this. It is very, very easy through smart card play and proper judging your opponents and watching what they're doing to basically screw over their strategy. If somebody has a hell-bent mindset about what their strategy is going to be on their turn, and you come along and you pick the dice they need, or you play a card that basically ruins their strategy for this turn, you can definitely mess with other players, and some people don't like that. There are games that I would suggest for people who like those kind of games that don't allow you to interact with other players' strategies as much, and those are probably better for those kind of player groups. But I can definitely say Seasons is a good game because it allows you to interact with other players, and that's something my play group likes. But it's definitely something you want to consider before you introduce Seasons to some players if they have a problem with people messing up their strategies, because this is a game where you can mess up with other players' strategies through proper card play and through proper dice selection. And if you really want to see somebody swear like a sailor in Seasons, as soon as they pay the 20 crystals to bring out that card that gives them 30 points at the end of the game, right here, go ahead and unsummon that on them and cost them those 20 crystals and see how many dirty words you can get out of their mouth in 30 seconds. There's one other minor quibble I have with Seasons, and I fully realize this is a personal issue because most of my player group doesn't have an issue with this, but I'm going to mention it. And that's going to be the colors chosen for the elements. Now for me, air having a red color confuses me all the time. I do not know why it does it, but for some reason, in my mind, air should be blue. And I think you saw that in the gameplay example, and I'm going to go back through and edit that, and you're going to have to see pretty much where the obvious edit is there, but at least you know I caught my mistake there. For some reason, every time I think I need to grab an air element, I'm going to go for a blue, which happens to be water, which does make sense, but for me, red should not be air. Red to me is fire, which is yellow. I guess that does make sense. Green makes sense as earth, but again, for some reason, I can't get it through my head that red is air, and I make that mistake all the time with my play group. They constantly have to monitor me because every time I need to grab fire, I always grab the red. So that's just a personal minor thing. I don't think it's really a knock against Seasons, but it's just something I want to mention because it can affect some people sometimes, or maybe I'm just a unique case. One other final thing to mention about Seasons is that Seasons is definitely at its best as a 2 or 3 player game. Now the game does play with 4 players, but as soon as you introduce that 4th player, you start bringing out some of the minor problems with Seasons become much more prominent. Now in a 2 or 3 player game, it's not that obvious, but as soon as you hit that 4th player game, you're going to start noticing that on your turn, there's pretty much not much you can do. Now it's just the nature of the design of the game. It's not a bad thing, it's just the way the game is designed. But you may have a 4 player game where you're having somebody who's taking a few minutes to figure out how to take their turn, which is going to kind of drive you crazy because in the back of your mind you're going to be thinking, okay, you only have 2 or 3 cards, you really should be knowing what you need to do. But you're going to run into those players who really need to analyze their turns just down to the minutest detail. And it's going to kind of make you realize that this game really doesn't allow you to do anything on your off turns. Now that's not unique to this kind of game, but it can make a 4 player game feel longer than it really is. Now an hour and a half game for a 4 player game really isn't that long, but for some reason in Seasons, I don't know what it is about this game, but when you play with 4 players and you're sitting around waiting for the other players to take their turn, it just makes the game really feel like it's dragging on. And I really think that issue stems from one of the issues that can creep up in this game with new players. This game does have a lot of cards with ongoing effects. Now what that means is you're going to have cards in play that are permanent cards that take effect when a certain action occurs. For example, if you have the Staff of Spring in play, it says you're going to gain 3 crystals whenever you summon a power card. Okay, doesn't seem that hard to keep track of. But let's say you have this card in play, and you also have the Forgotten Vase card in play, which says when you summon a power card, you gain 1 energy token. Okay, still doesn't seem that bad. You only have 2 cards to keep track of and watch the upkeep of. Well, let's say you got a third card in play with an upkeep, such as the Hourglass of Time that says each time the change of season happens, you gain an energy token. So now if you have 3 of these cards in play, that's 3 ongoing effects you need to keep track of. And it's possible to have 4, 5, or 6 of these ongoing effects in play, and you multiply that times 4 players, and you kind of get that chaos theory going on in there, and you're going to have people start forgetting to do things. And this is going to lead to circumstances and situations where somebody will say, wait, did I get my energy token last turn? Oh man, I think I forgot to do this last turn. Oh, does anybody know if I did this one action last turn? And that for some reason it just really multiplies and happens more often in a 4-player game. Especially when you have 4 players getting these ongoing effect cards out, because there are enough of these cards in the game that potentially all 4 players can get a couple of these out during a game. And it's a good strategy because these cards are powerful, especially if you get them out in the earliest rounds. Now these are the kind of cards, and I don't want to get too much into strategy, but these are the cards that you want out in the beginning of the game. So you want to keep using these so their ongoing effects help you through the entire game. So if you have a couple of these per player, it just seems to really add to that effect. And I think this is part of the reason why a 4-player game of Seasons feels like it goes on longer than it should. Now I have a very minor suggestion that might help you with this situation, and it helped myself and my playgroup with this. And what I do with my playgroup is anytime you get the cards that have the down arrow that only give you a one-time effect, anytime I put those in play, I simply just stack them on top of each other because I know that they're basically a one-time effect. And they're not going to help me much anymore for the rest of the game unless somebody plays a card on me that's going to force me to discard a power card. So I simply keep these all in one pile because they don't have any ongoing effects on them. And for me, that seems to work logically and allow me to remember to keep my cards that have ongoing effects separate. The next thing I do is the cards that allow you to activate once per turn, I'll keep those off to the side because I know those are only going to work when I want them to. And then finally, I'll keep my cards that have an ongoing effect directly in front of me so I can be constantly monitoring them, and I'll actually organize them in the order that they occur. So cards that happen every time I take a turn, I'm going to put towards the front. Cards that happen at the end of a season, I'm going to put towards the back. And it's a minor suggestion, but it seemed to help my play group, and it helped us get over that issue. Plus, combining that with the fact that we started playing Seasons multiple times, that's the other issue that's going to help you get over that, oops, I forgot to use this power card type of situation. That's going to creep up those first couple times you play Seasons. Now, there's one other problem with a 4-player game, and that's based on the fact that the game only goes through 3 years. And the first player changes every new year, but that means in a 4-player game, the 4th player will never get to be the first player. Now, some people say that can minorly affect your potential to win. I really don't think it's a big deal, but I did have one player who felt like they were having their potential impeded because they never got the first choice. I didn't think it was a big deal, but I'm going to mention it because I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, because they thought it was a potential problem. So I'm going to say it, but personally, I didn't experience that. And finally, the only final issue I had with Seasons was the insistence to use cubes. Now, I don't understand why games and companies constantly insist on using cubes. I think cubes are great. I think there's a little gnome workshop somewhere where these gnomes are working overtime trying to build all these cubes out of bonsai trees, but I think we need to stop using cubes all the time for games, especially for a game where you have a small track that's this minute, where it takes somebody bump the table once or twice, and you're not going to know where your cube was. My suggestion, if you own Seasons, go out to a craft store such as Michael's and Joann's and buy something called Carabone. I think they're called Carabone loops. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to put a picture when I edit this video so you can see exactly what they look like. You can buy them at Joann's or Michael's. Find them in the knitting section, and knitters use them to keep their place in their knitting. Sorry, I'm not a knitter. Don't know the terms for it. Somebody correct me here, but they use them for them to keep their place. And they're actually perfect little circles, and they perfectly mark your location, and they sit so much better on these. And not only that, you can actually see the number, which is something that the cubes do. They block your number. Not a big deal, but I think we need to stop relying on cubes for every single Euro game that comes out, because these Carabone rings work so much better. My overall opinion of Seasons is a great game. It's a fantastic strategy game, fantastic artwork, fun gameplay, great 2 to 3 player game. Probably it's going to be in my top 5 all-time 2-player games. Right up there where Stronghold Games, Confusion, Espionage game, which I think is a fantastic 2-player game. A couple other 2-player games I think are fantastic, like Dungeon Twister Prison. This is up there in my top 5 of 2 and 3-player games. Check out Seasons, fantastic strategy game. Give it a try, I think you're going to like it. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review. Thanks for watching.